Have you ever been reading a fictional story and been suddenly struck by this sensation, this feeling, this emotion, something you couldn't put quite into words? Was it as if you had just tasted or glimpsed something beyond the book itself and that drove straight to your very core? You're not alone. We're going to be unpacking this concept today in Ruminations, so stay tuned. Welcome to Ruminations podcast, where we are discussing topics of interest, intrigue, and mystery, all on the journey to authentic story making. I'm glad you're here. So today we're going to be opening up this topic that I believe lies at the very core of authentic story making. But unfortunately, it is this thing that we cannot quite pin down and put a perfect description to. So what is this topic? The word is myth. Maybe you've heard it along the lines I'm going to be talking about. Maybe all it is to you is what the common understanding of this word is. And that is just a fable or something that is untrue, something that is made up, a myth. It also is found in the root mythology. But there is a deeper layer to this word. At least the concept that is going to be discussed today, the term myth has been used to cover this by a lot of different writers, including J.R.R. Tolkien, C.S. Lewis, and many others. So the idea of myth, and the term, that is the term we're going to be using. It's, in my research, the one most widely used for this idea that we are unfolding today. And as C.S. Lewis said on that topic, whether it was the right term or not, let me pull it up here. When Lewis was going to be writing about this emotion, this feeling, this thing we're going to be talking about, he said, "I must either use the word myth or coin a word, and I think the former the lesser evil of the two." So he stuck with myth to just use. That's what we're going to be doing too. But whether we get caught up on the term, that's the less important thing. But I want to present it today so that as I talk about and reference this throughout my later podcasts and videos, you guys can know what I'm meaning by that. So, what do I and many others mean when they refer to myth? Now, this is an idea that is found in fictional stories, and that's the focus we're keeping today. But it can also be in painting, in art, in poetry, in music. It can be in simple, everyday experiences. So to nail it down, we're going to start unfolding it layer by layer. And as we get into it, we're going to find that, yes, this is something that can't quite be grasped fully, understood perfectly. But we can sense that it's there and we can experience it. And we can get a little bit closer to getting some kind of understanding of what this is. So what I'm going to do is going to pull up some quotes that I have put together. So the last couple months I have been reading some books on the topic. I will pull some of those up here. So the first one that introduced me to this idea was Tolkien, Author of the Century by Tom Shippey. And this is just an overview of Tolkien's works, kind of digging in deep to the development of language and how he just put so much meaning into all his names and his world building. But it also started opening up this concept of myth. And then I got a hold of this book, Christian Myth Makers by Roland Hine. And this also covers C.S. Lewis, George MacDonald, G.K. Chesterton. And the other one that I'm currently reading, I guess it's underneath my microphone right now. There we go. Is J.R. Tolkien, Myth, Morality, and Religion by Richard Purtill. So I'm just like a chapter or two into this, and it's just expanding on the idea. But let's dig into this now. what do we mean by myth? So I'm going to read some of these quotes, and some of them, a lot of them are from these books. So Clyde Kilby, he was kind of a contemporary of Lewis and Tolkien, and he was an American writer and English professor, and he wrote, "Myth is necessary because reality is so much larger than rationality." And this is kind of the first most important building block to this concept of myth. It's one of the first things I read that got my mind rolling on it. So, reality, everything that we are a part of. And if you remember, if you watched my last podcast, I talked about the unseen realm, and that is also included in reality. So in other words, everything that is real cannot all be rationalized, cannot all be explained. It cannot all be understood. And number one, I think you and I are very happy about that, because if you'll ever notice, as soon as you have put an explanation on something, as soon as you have figured something out, what happens? It loses its appeal, it loses its charm, it's your interest in this, whatever it is. Once you've explained it and put a tag on it, it loses something. So we're built to want something deeper. And when something can begin to be grasped, but not fully, that is intriguing to us. And that is something that we're reaching after, sometimes without even knowing it. So I'm going to read a couple more. Clyde Kilby again wrote, "Myth, in the Christian element of myth at least, it is therefore something like the Eucharist itself, a symbol of man's relationship to God and of his glorious return to paradisal fellowship with the uncreated, unconditional reality himself." So again, it's adding another little bit of a layer to this idea. Myth is something that is like, it's bringing some kind of restoration between man and our relationship with the uncreated one. The one who, as A.W. Tozer said, is the great unseen reality, God himself, who is eternal and unlimited, who is the one whose thoughts are not our thoughts. They're so much higher. And the one who C.S. Lewis, in his allegory of God in Aslan, said, he is not a tame lion. He is not one that you can box up. Something about myth is like a conduit to receive tastes and glimpses of the greater reality. So we're going to continue on. So Roland Hine, who is the author of Christian Mythmakers, a couple of the quotes I pulled out of that book from him are, so he says, "Successfully done, mythopoeic writing intimates something that cannot be told, but when fully known will be eternally satisfying." So it's building onto this idea. He also says, "Myth arouses desire for escape into a higher reality, generates a recovery of appreciation for the world we know, and entices with the ultimate consolation of a just, eternal reward." So in other words, something about myth seems to be pervasive, full of these morals, these truths of, well, things that are laid down in the Bible for one thing, but they are touching on, again, that deeper reality that goes beyond what we can see, but is there and is probably even more real in a sense than the material world around us. So we're just building on this idea. And I think as this podcast continues, it's going to become apparent that this idea is still very much obscure in my own mind. I'm still learning a lot about it. I'm very much a novice on this topic, but it's just very intriguing, and there's something very, like I said, this is basically, I feel like, at the core of authentic story making. So I'm digging in, looking for the gold. All right, so C.S. Lewis, he was very much a proponent, and he often he used the word myth, as I mentioned earlier, but he also loved to use the German term, I think it's pronounced Sehnsucht, but basically it's the German word describing this longing for something that is outside this life, almost a longing for something that you can't figure out what it is. And that is, according to Lewis, basically what we're experiencing through this avenue in this realm of myth. So here's some of the things he used to describe that. He said, "We feel it to be numinous. It is as if something of great moment had been communicated to us." He said elsewhere, "We do not want merely to see the beauty. We do not want merely to see beauty, though God knows even that is bounty enough. We want something else which can hardly be put into words. To be united with the beauty we see, to pass into it, to receive it into ourselves, to bathe in it, to become part of it." So all of these things he's saying is he's trying to convey also what he has experienced and what he's trying to develop in his own writing, and just try and put his words to this deep concept that is just so intriguing. And he described myth. He said how myth works. He said, "What flows into you from myth is not truth, but reality." And then he says, in parentheses, "Truth is always about something, but reality is that about which truth is." And then he says, "Therefore, every myth becomes the father of innumerable truths on the abstract level." So we're kind of getting this picture that myth, I don't think, is the experience itself, but it is the avenue, the conduit, the vehicle for it. Hence writing, hence music, and all these different ways to experience whatever this is, what we're trying to put words to. All right, so is there any more quotes I want to give? Not right now. Nope. So, okay. Let's start putting these concepts together. So, myth is this unique vehicle or conduit of reality, the greater reality that is beyond what can be rationalized. And things like writing fictional stories, at least, if they're done correctly, something about, because not every story has achieved this level of conveying myth. But using these avenues is somehow allowing us to achieve glimpses or tastes from something beyond, something a part of reality, just as much as this physical book, this microphone, something that is as much a part of reality, but is even more at the core of it. So myth is basically this avenue, this way for it to be experienced. So sorry, I'm going to pull up another quote. Let's see. Oh, this is actually Ecclesiastes 3:11. So this is, I think, a big part of what plays into it. So there's this statement in Ecclesiastes that God has put eternity in the heart of man. And to me, that is saying that in created man, there's this piece, this hollow in our soul that, as I heard one pastor say, I don't recall who said it, but I remember hearing this at one point, and I think it's true. There is a God-sized hole in the heart of every man and woman. Their eternity is in our hearts. In other words, that kind of shows why we can never reach this place where we feel completely satisfied and you don't need anything else. Why do we've reached this place of explaining something that becomes boring? We want something more. It's like a vacuum. And the only thing big enough to fill that vacuum of eternity in our hearts is the great unseen reality himself. Because he is the all-encompassing reality. He is the one who is full of mystery and cannot be figured out. See, a lot of people think they can figure out God, but you can't box up the eternal. You can't box up the one who has no limits. So, continuing on, one of my younger brothers had a kind of a cool analogy to use for trying to, again, understand this concept of myth and what it does. He said it's very much like mist. In a misty day, say you're on a walk out in the country, and there's mist all over the hills, but you can catch glimpses of the landmarks maybe, but it's obscure. And but there's just something about it that just kind of draws at you. The mystery quality of it is very much kind of like what myth does, is it's giving us glimpses, it's drawing us in, it's telling us there's something deeper here. And we want to find out, we want to chase after it. So I think that was a kind of a cool analogy that he brought up. Well, I've already talked about the German word Sehnsucht. There is also another Welsh word that is kind of similar that I've mentioned in one of my other videos before. It's hiraeth. And that is basically, it's a very similar concept, but it's a little more focused in on more of a homesickness kind of a sensation, where it's this feeling, this homesickness for a place that you've probably never even actually known, but you just have this draw and this yearning for this home place. Maybe it was lost, or maybe it was something that you've tasted, but you're desiring. So it's just a kind of another layer onto all of these things. I think are pieces to what this topic of myth. So I think, yeah, it's just, again, there's so much to this topic, and I am very new to trying to understand it. And again, in and of itself, it's not something that can be fully understood, but we can still grasp basically what it is in a sense and what it's doing, even though it's still full of mystery and full of something that cannot be rationalized in that sense. So I showed you the books I've been reading on the subject. There are a couple others I do not have, but I'd like to get. There's a few by Clyde Kilby, that first one I quoted, that I think look pretty interesting. And the book I'm reading now, Richard Purtill, he apparently has another one called Lord of the Elves and Eldils. So that's a little bit more on the topic of, probably similar to what I talked about in my last podcast, the Eldils being part of that unseen realm in the Space Trilogy. Just interesting books I'd like to collect and continue to build my understanding of this topic of myth. So, why are there some books that have this quality of myth and some don't? Or why will one person have this myth experience with a book, and then someone else will read the same book and not have it at all? These are the questions I'm asking, and I don't know yet. And I don't know if there's a full, solid, clear answer on that. But it'd be interesting to just keep searching that out and seeing, because again, the goal is to get closer and closer to being able to be a maker of authentic story and being able to write something in which someone reading can have that sense of myth, that sense of something deeper that pulls you deeper. And that's just part of the journey that I am on. And again, I just wanted to do this introductory video introducing this topic of myth so that as I do more videos, I can reference and use the word myth and that you guys can know what I'm talking about. But like I said, it's very introductory, it's very basic, and but it's very exciting to study. So maybe you guys have never heard of this topic before. Maybe you've looked into it and have some comments. I'd love to hear. But or just comment in general what you think of this whole topic in general. And I think I'm enjoying doing these podcasts. I'm going to keep doing them. I think I'm going to do one podcast a week and one writing vlog a week is the plan. The podcast will come out Monday to Tuesday, and the writing vlogs Thursday, Friday, somewhere in there. But thank you guys for joining me today. That's going to be it. It's going to close it out. Glad you came. And again, I appreciate you guys commenting and liking and subscribing. And we'll catch you next time.